I noticed something was off the moment my daughter called it our home instead of your home. She said it on the phone casually, the way you say things when you've already made a decision and you're just narrating it to the other person. Mum, we were thinking it would be so much easier if you just moved into our home with us. Not your home, not even a home together. Ours. As if the arrangement had already been settled somewhere I wasn't invited. I am 68 years old. I spent 31 years teaching fourth grade in Savannah, Georgia, which means I have spent 3 decades learning to read the difference between what children say and what they mean. My daughter is 41, but that skill does not expire. I told her I would think about it. I hung up the phone and stood in my kitchen for a while, looking out at the azaleas my husband planted along the back fence the spring before he died. That was 6 years ago. 6 years of learning how to fill a house that was built for two. The offer was practical on its face. My daughter and her husband lived 40 minutes away in Pula, in a house with a finished basement that had its own entrance and a small sitting room they described as perfect for me. My knees had been unreliable for the past 2 years. My car was aging. I had friends in Savannah, a church I had attended for 22 years, a garden I had kept alive through 3 droughts and 1 hurricane. But I was 68 and alone, and the world has a way of making 68-year-old women feel like a problem that needs solving. I said yes in February. By April, I had packed what mattered, sold what didn't, and watched strangers carry boxes out of the house where I had raised my daughter and buried my husband, and learned slowly that a life can hold more grief than you expect and still keep going. The basement was nice. I want to say that honestly, because it was. New carpet, a little kitchenette, a bathroom they had just retiled in white. My daughter had put fresh flowers on the table the day I arrived, and my son-in-law carried my boxes down without complaint. It felt like kindness. I chose to believe it was. The first month was fine, the way first months often are, before the arrangement settles into its true shape. I cooked dinner twice a week because I wanted to contribute. I watched my grandson after school on Tuesdays and Thursdays because my daughter's work schedule was unpredictable and childcare was expensive. And he was 7 years old, and I loved him in the particular helpless way that grandmothers love the children of their children. His name was Emmett, and he had his grandfather's habit of going very still when he was thinking hard about something, and watching him do it made my chest ache in a way I had grown to find almost sweet. By the second month, I was watching Emmett 4 days a week. By the third month, I was watching him every day school let out, and twice I had stayed through dinner because my daughter texted that they were running late and could I just feed him whatever was in the fridge. The fridge, by that point, was mostly my groceries because I had started buying the household staples without really noticing how it had happened. Milk, bread, the specific brand of orange juice my son-in-law preferred, the crackers Emmett liked, the coffee my daughter couldn't start her day without. Small things. I told myself they were small things. It was Emmett, in the end, who showed me what I had not wanted to see. He was doing homework at the kitchen table one Tuesday afternoon in the middle of October, and I was washing the dishes from the lunch I had made him. And he looked up from his worksheet and said, completely without preamble, the way 7-year-olds ask things, Grandma, "Where does Mom get your letters?" I turned off the faucet. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" He pointed toward the little built-in desk near the hallway where my daughter kept her household papers. "She gets the mail every day," he said, "and sometimes she puts some in her drawer. She told me those were your letters, and she was keeping them safe for you." I dried my hands on the dish towel slowly. "How long has she been doing that?" I asked. He shrugged, the way children shrug when time is not yet a meaningful unit of measure for them. "Since you moved in, I think." I waited until he was settled in front of his after-school show. Then I went to the built-in desk and opened the drawer my daughter used for household papers. My name was on 11 envelopes. I sat down at the desk and opened them in order of postmark. 2 were statements from my financial institution, the one I had used for 20 years, the one that held my pension deposits and my savings, and the modest investment account my husband and I had built so carefully over 4 decades. 1 was a letter from my insurance company. 1 was from the Social Security Administration. The rest were from a law firm I did not recognize, a firm based in Atlanta, and the letters inside were addressed to me. But the language was not written for me. They were preliminary correspondence regarding the voluntary transfer of financial management responsibilities to a designated family representative for the purpose of protecting the long-term interests of a senior household member. I read that sentence 4 times. Then I read the rest of the letters. They were sequential, building on each other, the kind of paperwork that accumulates when someone has been moving steadily toward a goal and has not yet told the person most affected by it. The language was careful and full of words, like protective and comprehensive and peace of mind, the kind of words that sound like care until you understand that they are a framework for removing a person's right to manage her own life. My daughter had been corresponding with a law firm about taking control of my finances. She had been intercepting my mail to do it, and she had done it while I was downstairs making dinner for her son and buying her household groceries and believing, sincerely, that I had made a good decision. I put the letters back in the envelopes. I put the envelopes back in the drawer in the same order I had found them. Then I went downstairs to my little basement apartment, sat on the edge of my bed, and was very quiet for a long time. The azaleas were not there. That was the thing I kept coming back to, sitting on that bed in that room that was not mine, in that house that belonged to someone else. I had left my garden. I had left my church and my friends and the porch where I used to drink my morning coffee and watch the neighborhood come awake. And I had done it because I loved my daughter, and because the world had made me feel like a problem, and because I had believed the offer was an act of care. I understood now what it actually was. I did not sleep. I lay in the dark and listened to the house settle above me, footsteps moving from the bedroom to the bathroom and back, the low murmur of the television through the ceiling, the sounds of people who are comfortable in their home. I thought about 31 years of teaching other people's children, of recognizing when a child was telling you what they thought you wanted to hear versus what was true, of learning that the gap between those two things is where the real information lives. I had been taught by experts. I should have known. At 5 in the morning, I got up, dressed quietly, and drove myself to the IHOP on Abercorn Street because I needed to be somewhere that was not that basement, and I needed coffee that I had not made myself, and I needed to think without the feeling of someone else's ceiling pressing down on me. I sat in a corner booth and worked through it the way I'd always worked through hard things, by starting at the beginning and going in order. The beginning was 6 months ago, when my daughter first made the offer. I thought about how quickly she had moved once I agreed, how she had offered to handle the address change for me, to make it easier. I had thought that was thoughtful. I understood now it was efficient. She had redirected my mail to this house before I ever arrived, which meant she had been planning this for longer than February. I thought about the financial statement she had been intercepting, about the law firm in Atlanta, about what it would have looked like if I had not found those letters. I would have continued watching Emmett every day. I would have continued buying the groceries and cooking the dinners. I would have waited for paperwork to arrive that never came, or that came already signed, and by the time I understood what had happened, the framework would have been in place. A designated family representative. For the protection of a senior household member. She would have managed my pension, my savings, the investment account her father and I built for 40 years. I drank my coffee and watched the parking lot fill up with the early morning people, the ones who are somewhere before 6 a.m. because they have to be or because they cannot sleep, and I decided what I needed to do. First, I drove to my bank. I had banked at the same branch since 1987, when my husband and I opened our first joint account 3 weeks after our wedding. The branch manager was a woman named Paulette, and she had processed the paperwork when my husband died and helped me restructure everything into my name alone, and had never once looked at me the way some people at financial institutions look at widowed women, like grief is the first sign of incapacity. I told her I needed to review all activity on my accounts for the past 6 months, and I needed to see whether any correspondence addresses had been changed. She pulled up the records. The mailing address on my accounts had been changed in March, 6 weeks after I agreed to move, updated to my daughter's address in Pula. The request had come through the online portal with my login credentials. I looked at Paulette. She looked at me. "I need to change the address back to a new address," I said, "and I need to change all my passwords and security questions, and I need to add a verbal confirmation requirement to any account changes going forward." Paulette typed without hesitating. She also flagged something else. In August, someone had called customer service line and inquired about the process for adding a co-account holder for account management purposes on behalf of an elderly primary account holder. The call had not resulted in any changes, but it had been made. "Freeze any pending requests," I said. "All of them." Paulette nodded, and her fingers moved steadily, and I sat across from her feeling the particular calm that comes not from the absence of pain, but from the decision to act inside it. I had felt it before, the morning after my husband's first bad diagnosis, when I walked into the doctor's office and asked every question I had, and wrote down every answer, and drove home and made dinner like the world still had shape. You do not get through 31 years of teaching and 6 years of widowhood without learning how to hold yourself together when everything underneath you is uncertain. When we finished, I thanked Paulette and got back in my car. Then I drove to the office of my attorney. I had worked with him years ago after my husband passed. His name was not someone you forgot. Everyone in the office called him Mr. C, which had struck me as both familiar and respectful. And he had struck me as the kind of man who understood that the people sitting across from him had already been through more than the paperwork indicated. He rose when I entered and shook my hand and told his assistant to hold his calls, and I told him everything, from the phone call in February to the letters in the drawer, to the address change to the inquiry at the bank. He listened the way good lawyers listen, without interrupting, without performing sympathy, just taking in the information and organizing it in real time. When I finished, he asked me one question. He asked what outcome I was looking for. I told him I wanted to make sure that whatever I had built over 68 years stayed mine. That no one could arrange my life without my knowledge or permission. That if something happened to me, the person who received anything I had left behind would be someone who deserved it. He accepted that. We began. I had my house in Savannah, which I had not yet sold, because something had stopped me, some stubborn instinct I had not examined until that morning in the IHOP parking lot. I had my pension, and my savings, and the investment account. I had a small life insurance policy and a plot of land in coastal Georgia that my husband's family had left us 20 years ago, and that my daughter had mentioned twice, in passing, in ways that suggested she had a use for it in mind. I updated my will. My daughter and son-in-law were removed as primary beneficiaries. Everything went into a trust for Emmett, managed by an independent trustee until he turned 25. My attorney would serve as executor. The land went to my church's community foundation, which was what I had always intended before the last 6 months had blurred my intentions. Then I told my attorney something I had not fully said out loud before that moment. I told him I wanted to move back to Savannah. He looked at me steadily and said that was not a legal matter, but it seemed like the right decision. I drove back to Pula in the middle of the afternoon and let myself into the basement apartment and sat at the little kitchenette table for a while. The fresh flowers my daughter had put out in April were long gone, of course. The table now held a pile of Emmett's drawings and a charger that belonged to my son-in-law, and a coupon circular addressed to my daughter. The space had become storage for other people's overflow, the way spaces do when the person occupying them has not made it clear that they have limits. I had not made anything clear. That was the part I kept returning to. My daughter had not arrived at this fully formed. She had learned, over years, that I was a person who gave without requiring anything in return, who stepped in without being asked, who absorbed inconvenience and called it love. I had taught her that, not intentionally, but thoroughly. And somewhere between what she had learned and what she had wanted, she had found a path that led her to law firms in Atlanta, an intercepted mail and a basement apartment that was becoming less and less mine. I do not say this to excuse it. I say it because it is true, and because understanding how a thing happened does not mean accepting that it continues. My phone was ringing by the time I heard the garage door open at 5:45. I did not answer it. My daughter came downstairs first. She appeared in the doorway of the basement apartment with the expression of someone who has been rehearsing a conversation and is not certain which version is needed yet. "Mom," she said, "something's happening with your bank account. I got an alert on the family portal." I looked at her. She was 41 years old, and she still had the habit, when she was uncertain, of tugging at the sleeve of her jacket the way she had tugged at the sleeve of her school uniform. At 8 years old, when she was about to tell me something she knew I would not like. "What family portal?" I said. Something shifted behind her eyes. "I set up a family account monitoring service a while back," she said, "just to keep an eye on things in case you needed help." "I didn't ask for that," I said. "I know, but I didn't know about it," I said. She stopped pulling at her sleeve. "Sit down," I said. "I want to talk to you." She sat at the kitchenette table among her son's drawings and her husband's charger and the coupon circular, and I sat across from her and I told her what I knew. The letters from the Atlanta law firm, the mails she had been intercepting since I moved in, the address change on my accounts, the phone call to my bank about adding a co-account holder. I did not raise my voice. There was no point in raising it. I had waited all day, and now I had things to say, and I said them with the same steadiness I had used for 31 years in a classroom, the kind that comes from knowing that the person across from you is listening not for volume, but for certainty. She tried several things. She said she was worried about me. She said the law firm had only been exploratory, that she had not meant for it to go anywhere, that she had only been trying to plan ahead. She said that watching Emmett and helping with groceries was something I had offered to do, that she had not asked me. She said I was misreading the situation, that I was upset and not thinking clearly, that maybe I should wait before making any decisions. That last one I let sit in the air between us for a moment. "I've been thinking clearly since 5 this morning," I said. "I went to my bank and I spoke with my attorney, and I've updated everything that needed updating. My accounts are mine. My will is current. And I'm going to move back to Savannah." She looked at me the way people look when they have been walking toward something for a long time and have just run into a wall they did not see coming. "You can't," she said, and then she heard herself and corrected. "I mean, you don't have to. You're settled here. Emmett needs you." "Emmett needs a grandmother," I said, "not a live-in arrangement that was built to serve other purposes." My son-in-law appeared in the doorway then. He must have been listening from the stairs. He was a man who, in 6 months of living in the same house, had never once asked me about my life before I moved in, about who I was before I became useful to his household. He had the decency to look at the floor. Neither of them said anything else that mattered. I began packing that evening. Not everything. Just what I needed for the immediate future. Emmett appeared in the doorway of the basement apartment around 8 o'clock, long after he should have been in bed, in his pajamas with the dinosaurs on them, his grandfather's stillness on his face. "Are you leaving?" he asked. "I'm going back to my house," I said. "Because of Mum and Dad?" I looked at my grandson and thought about what to say to a 7-year-old about things that are true but complicated. Because that's where I belong, I said. But you can call me whenever you want. And I'll come to your games and your school things, and I'll make your birthday cake the way I always have. He considered this with the gravity that he applied to most things. The chocolate one, he said. The chocolate one, he said. The chocolate one, I said. He came and hugged me around the middle and then went back upstairs without saying anything else, the way children do when they understand that some things are settled and good night is the appropriate response. I was back in Savannah by the following Thursday. My neighbour 2 doors down had a daughter who had just vacated a furnished apartment above her garage, and she offered it to me at a price that was, as she put it, neighbourly, until I figured out my next step. I moved in with 4 boxes and my good chair and the quilt my mother made me and the coffee mug my husband gave me on our 25th anniversary. Plain ceramic with a small blue stripe around the rim that I had always thought was understated and exactly right. The first morning, I sat on the small deck above the garage and drank my coffee and listened to the neighborhood, which sounded the way Savannah sounds in October, which is to say like something unhurried and faintly sweet and entirely itself. My phone was quieter than it had been in months. My daughter called 3 times in the first week. The first call I did not answer. The second call I answered and said that I needed time and that we would talk when I was ready. The third call she did not leave a message. My son-in-law sent one text. It said, "I want you to know I wasn't involved in the legal stuff. That was her idea." I read it once and put my phone down and thought about whether that made things better or different, and decided it made them neither. Emmett called me on a Friday afternoon from what sounded like a school hallway. He said, "Grandma, I told my teacher I have a grandma in Savannah, and she said that's a great city." I told him it was. He said he had to go, but that he'd call me on the weekend. He did. Weeks passed. The azaleas along my old back fence were someone else's to tend now, but the neighbour whose garage apartment I lived in had a camellia bush along her fence that she said she could never quite manage, and she asked one morning if I had any thoughts. I had several. We spent a Saturday afternoon with it together, and it was the best afternoon I had spent in longer than I wanted to admit. My daughter came to Savannah on a Saturday in November, 6 weeks after I moved out. She came alone. No son-in-law. No Emmett. She knocked on the garage apartment door, not hard, the knock of someone who is not certain of her welcome. I let her in. She sat in the good chair because it was the only chair, and I sat on the edge of the bed, and she looked at the 4 boxes still unpacked in the corner, and the quilt on the bed, and the coffee mug on the little shelf I had cleared above the kitchenette, and she said, very quietly, "I think I told myself I was protecting you. I think I believed that for a while. I waited. But Emmett told me what he said to you, about the letters. And I keep thinking about the fact that my 7-year-old son noticed something I told myself you'd never notice." She stopped. That should tell me something. It should, I agreed. She looked at her hands. "I got scared," she said. "After Dad died, I watched you manage everything alone, and I kept thinking, what if something happens to her and she's not prepared? And then somewhere along the way that turned into thinking that I knew better than you what prepared looked like. And then it turned into something I don't have a good name for. Control," I said. She didn't disagree. We sat with that for a while. I did not tell her that everything was forgiven because it was not yet, not in the way that real forgiveness works, which is slowly and incompletely and with effort from both directions. I told her that I loved her, which was true, and that love had never been the parting question, and that what I needed from her was not arrangements made on my behalf, but honesty, and that those were 2 very different things. She nodded. Her eyes were red, in the way of someone who has been honest with herself in the dark and has arrived at something she could not unfind. Before she left, she asked if she could bring Emmett to visit the following weekend. I said yes. After she drove away, I stood on the small deck above the garage and watched the street settle back into its Saturday quiet. The sky was that particular shade of November blue that only exists in coastal Georgia, something between pale and deep, too soft to name. A man was raking leaves 3 houses down. A dog trotted past with the focused energy of a dog who has important business somewhere. I thought about what I had lost in the last year and what I had found and tried to be honest about the balance of it. I had lost the house I built with my husband, at least for now. I had lost 6 months in a basement apartment that had never quite been mine. I had lost a version of my daughter I had not quite seen clearly enough before all of this. I had found my accounts, fully mine, my will, which said what I intended. Ascertained a camellia bush that needed someone who knew what they were doing. A Saturday afternoon that belonged to no one's schedule but my own. I thought about all the years I had organized my days around other people's needs. First my students, then my husband through his illness, then my daughter's household, then the idea that being needed and being loved were the same thing. I had been a nurse's aide once in my 20s, before I found teaching, and I had learned in that job that there is a specific kind of exhaustion that comes from giving without being seen, from being essential to everyone's comfort but your own. I had been running on that kind of tired for longer than I knew. Standing on that deck with the November light going golden and the street doing its ordinary Saturday things, I felt something I had not felt in years, which was the particular lightness of a day with no one's emergency in it. No texts about account numbers. No afternoons absorbed by someone else's schedule. No quiet accumulation of my own resources into someone else's life. My phone lit up on the little table beside the door. Emmett. A drawing he had made at school. A woman with grey hair and large glasses standing in front of what appeared to be a very ambitious flower. He had written at the bottom, in the uneven capital letters of a second grader, "Grandmay at her garden." I looked at it for a long time, then I typed back, "This is beautiful. Save it for me. I'm coming to get it next weekend." He sent back a single star. I had spent most of my life believing that love was demonstrated through availability, that a good mother, a good grandmother, a good woman was one who never said this far and no further. I had believed that setting a limit was a kind of coldness, and I had arranged myself around that belief until I fit perfectly into every space someone else needed me to fill. I understood now that a limit is not a wall. It is not the end of love. It is the shape love makes when it has decided to survive. I was 68 years old. I had a grandson who drew pictures of me in my garden, and a daughter who was, for the first time in a long time, beginning to understand the difference between caring for someone and managing them. I had money in accounts that were mine alone, and a will that said what I meant, and a camellia bush that was already looking better. I had a deck where I could drink my coffee in the morning without checking anyone else's schedule first. The November light was doing something extraordinary to the live oaks down the street, turning them gold and almost transparent, the way old things go when the light is right. My husband had loved this light. He used to stand at the kitchen window on October and November afternoons and just watch it happen, the way a person watches something they know is temporary and chooses to be present for it anyway. I thought, I am still here. I am still watching. That was enough. On some mornings it was more than enough. On some mornings it was everything. There is a moment I keep coming back to, and it is not the drawer full of letters, though that is the moment everything became clear. It is earlier than that. It is Emmett at the kitchen table, doing his homework, asking me in the plain and uncomplicated way of a 7-year-old why his mother kept my mail. He was not trying to expose anyone. He did not understand what he was telling me. He only knew what he had seen, and he said it, because children who are not yet taught to look away from things tend to just say what is true. I think about that a lot. About how the clearest moral vision in that house belonged to the youngest person in it. What happened to me did not happen because my daughter was a cruel person. I want to be precise about that because it matters. She had watched me absorb difficulty for 31 years in a classroom and for 6 years alone after her father died, and she had learned from watching me that I would rearrange myself to fit whatever was needed. I had taught her that, not in words, but in the 1,000 quiet ways a mother demonstrates what she believes about herself. I gave without limit and called it love. She received without limit, and in time called it planning. That is the cause and the effect, plainly stated. Not a villain and a victim, two people and the habits they built together, and the point at which those habits led somewhere that could not be walked back without a reckoning. What I had to find in that IHOP booth at 5 in the morning with my coffee going cold was the clarity to see it without excusing it. Those are not the same thing. Understanding how a thing happened is not the same as deciding it is acceptable. I had spent too many years confusing those two positions, and the confusion had cost me a house. I had no reason to leave. 6 months in a basement that was becoming storage, and a pile of letters from a law firm in Atlanta that were written in my name but not for my benefit. The intelligence I needed was not complicated. It was the kind that comes from being willing to read what is actually in front of you instead of what you hope to find. The letters were in the drawer. The address change was in the bank records. The inquiry had been made. I had all the information I needed. I had simply not yet decided to use it. Deciding to use it, driving to the bank, sitting across from my attorney, packing my boxes, that was not anger. That was the exercise of a mind that had finally stopped negotiating with evidence. And then there was the matter of staying upright through it. I have been tired in my life. I was tired the morning I drove to the IHOP. I was tired sitting in my attorney's office. I was tired carrying those 4 boxes into a garage apartment at 68 years old, knowing that this was not the version of this chapter I had imagined. But I have also learned, over a life that has included a husband's illness and a classroom full of other people's children and 6 years of holding a house together alone, that the decision to keep moving is not the same as the decision to be okay. You do not have to be okay. You have to keep going anyway, one task at a time, until the morning arrives, when the weight of it is slightly less than the morning before. That morning came. It came with a camellia bush and a neighbor who did not need anything from me. It came with Emmett's drawing of a woman with large glasses standing in front of an ambitious flower. It came with the specific quiet of a Saturday that belonged entirely to me. I was not owed a perfect outcome. I was not owed my daughter's instant understanding or my son-in-law's remorse or a tidy resolution that wrapped everything clean. What I was owed was my own life, conducted on my own terms, with my accounts in my name and my will, saying what I meant, and my mornings starting at whatever hour I chose. That is what I took back, not with bitterness, with both hands,